Hello, everybody, and happy Wednesday. Welcome into GC Live. Kendall Smith and Jack Veltri joining you here on Gamecock Central. Hope that you're all having a fantastic day so far. Jack, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. You've been busy so far. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Kendall. It's always good seeing you and glad to have you co-hosting with me on GC Live on Wednesdays from now on. That's super exciting. We're glad to have you back in some way, some form, helping out. And yeah, it's been busy today. It's always busy during football season, right? As you are well aware from spending all your time with GC and stuff. It's crazy, but we're here, we're alive, and yeah, we're ready to talk some football.
You made it through week one of the college football season. So congratulations to you. I feel like that's always the hardest thing to do because you're getting back into the schedule, back into the routine, back into the game day vibes, and you did a great job of it. So if you haven't been able to check it out, go see all of the amazing things that Jack and the crew are doing over on GamecockCentral.com and follow us on social media at Gamecock Central. But certainly a lot to get to today, Jack. And we heard for the first time today from Dowell Loggains and Clayton White since South Carolina's win this past week against Old Dominion. And I think a lot of questions that needed to be answered, and certainly a lot that we've already talked about from that game on Saturday. I feel like we've gone through every little thing that you could possibly think about, but it's always good when you hear from the coaches and when you see what they have to say. We get immediate reaction from Shane Bieber after the games, but the coordinators are a different story. Hear from them a little bit later in the week. Of course, that was today. So you were at the press conference, you were taking it in, Jack. Let's just start broad and then we'll kind of reel it back in. What were your initial takeaways from what Dowell Loggains and Clayton White had to say today?
Yeah, there was a lot of good things they both had to say. Obviously, the story of Saturday's game versus Old Dominion definitely was the fact that this defense stepped it up and played very well. You forced 4 turnovers. You had 2 plays that you want back that ended up in touchdowns. But other than that, the defense was honestly spectacular for our first game of the year. And then offensively, the run game was pretty good, but then you get into the passing game and it was a bit of a struggle. And that's something Dowell Loggains admitted today. And we'll talk about that here shortly with some of the issues from Saturday, because there was definitely a lot of good, but more so I think a lot of bad because you only beat Old Dominion by 4 points. So, I mean, these guys were pretty open and honest about what needs to be fixed heading into Saturday. Because, I mean, look, this Kentucky game, we've talked about it for a while now. Like, it's the first SEC game of the year. It's only a week 2 matchup, but, man, it feels like a potential swing game for either side because, I mean, whoever wins this game, the trajectory to get to a bowl game is a lot more clear, like especially for South Carolina. If you start the year out 2-0, I mean, it really sets the tone for what you can do the rest of the year, and it's the same thing with Kentucky. So lots to talk about here, but yeah, I mean, we could start out with the offense if you want.
Yeah, we'll get into the offense here in just a second. But before we do, we have our amazing friend, Clint Hammond, who has been sponsoring Gamecock Central and GC Live for as long as I can remember. So we want to give him some love and a quick shout out as we start off the show, Jack.
Yeah, so if you're in the need for buying a home or you're just looking for help with your mortgage, you can go ahead and give a call to our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. Clint has been in the mortgage industry since, gosh, I believe maybe 2003. Again, like Kendall said, he's been a big sponsor of Gamecock Central for as long as either of us can remember. And yeah, he's always been a big supporter of GC, big Gamecock fan. I know he's helped out our very own Wes Mitchell and even former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth in the past. So you're looking for help with your home loans, buying a home. I know it's tough in this day and age, in this economy, in this market, but I'm sure it's possible. And especially with a guy like Clint Hammond, you really can't go wrong. So if you're looking to get in contact with him, the number to call for him is 803-422-6797. Again, the number to call Clint Hammond is 803-422-6797. You can also go to clinthammond.com, or the NMLS number for him is 71597. Again, the NMLS number for Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans is 71597.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate Clint for all that he does for Gamecock Central. And with that being said, what's up to everybody watching? Let's go ahead and get into what we are talking about here today, which is essentially what the coordinators talked about. And it's our first time hearing from them since the game on Saturday night. We're going to start off on the offensive side of things. Jack, you said it. You said the coordinators today were being very honest, and that is what you need. You need your coordinators to tell you how it is, tell the truth, especially after a game like Saturday, because it was disappointing. I mean, when you look at it as a whole, and I think everybody could agree with this, yes, a win is a win. And I know South Carolina is grateful to be in the win column, but in week one against Old Dominion, that's not exactly what you're hoping for if you're South Carolina, an SEC school. So let's talk about the realities, what Dowell Loggains had to say. You gave a short synopsis to start off the show, but want to get a little bit deeper into what he said about LaNorris Sellers. Obviously, his first start as a quarterback for South Carolina came on Saturday. He even said himself he was a little bit nervous for that start, rightfully so. I think anybody would be in that situation. I know I sure would be. But let's talk about a little bit of what Dowell had to say regarding LaNorris Sellers and how he feels after that week one performance as we head into a huge game in week two at Kentucky.
Yeah, so I actually asked Dowell about LaNorris specifically today. And from my perspective, look, let's look at the bigger picture for LaNorris for a second. This guy won the starting quarterback job, had to go through a whole quarterback battle, even though everyone was, pretty sure this guy was going to be the QB1 from the jump. But think about all the pressure this guy has on him. I mean, 80,000 people going to the home opener on Saturday, and the mood of what happens for them next, whether they're happy, sad, whatever, pretty much all falls on the shoulders of this guy. So he's got, I don't want to say the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he's got the weight of an entire state that roots for him, and just any Gamecock fan in general, that the whole weight of their fandom is on his shoulders. So that's a lot of pressure. And look, I mean, his first offensive start at quarterback, I mean, it had its moments, but I think a lot more struggles as opposed to positives. He went 10 of 23 throwing the ball for 114 yards, only completed 43% of his passes, and he had to rely a lot more on his feet to make things happen. And I think that was something that really stood out to me, is the fact that he's not your typical pocket passer, right? He's someone that can, he's 240 pounds, 6 foot, whatever, can run. He's mobile. So he's going to use his legs from time to time. He had to run 22 times on Saturday. So that was my main question with Dowell, was that, do you want to see him? Is it good that he's running that much, or do we need to see him more in the pocket? And the way he answered it was kind of just the right answer. I mean, the big thing is that LaNorris Sellers is 1-0. So that's the mission that was accomplished. I mean, the fact that you didn't lose that game, you found a way to get the job done. And let's not forget, LaNorris did score the game-winning touchdown in the final minutes there. So the fact that he was able to go out and do that was a big thing. But again, kind of like what I was just saying, I mean, Dowell recognizes that there's a lot of pressure on this guy, but he's going to grow. And the game was definitely sped up and fast for him for his first start. I think there was a lot of excitement in the air from what D-Lo could tell. But again, it's a good opportunity for him to move forward now that he's got one star under his belt. He's going into a big SEC matchup on the road. Dowell believes he's going to be able to handle it well and move forward. And I think now that he's got his first start out of the way, I know people were saying jitters and all that. I don't know if I really buy into it, maybe a little bit, but I do think he's going to be a lot better off this weekend. But it's not all on him. It comes down to what the receivers and those guys are going to do.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult as a quarterback of a football team. You're absolutely right. And I agree with you, Jack. I think that a lot of the pressure and a lot of the blame is put on that position specifically because you are involved in essentially every snap when your offense is on the field. So for LaNorris Sellers, it is a lot of pressure, and there is a lot of weight on his shoulders to perform for this team, and certainly high expectations for this group this year. But even Dowell Loggains said it today. He said he didn't think that Sellers looked scared or timid necessarily on Saturday. He said he looked excited and sped up. And he even mentioned himself, like, it's not easy to go out there as a redshirt freshman in the SEC. So Dowell Loggains recognizing that today as well when he spoke with the media. But something that I thought was interesting that he talked about today was the run game getting a little leaky at times in the red zone. He said that he could have even been a little bit more aggressive with his play calling. What did you make of that comment, Jack?
Yeah, and we'll play the clip real quick, but here's exactly what he had to say. D-Lo had to say on the red zone struggles a little bit, and then we'll get right into what the thoughts are from that.
Last year we were, I think, number one in the SEC in red area offense. I think our run game got a little leaky at times down there. I could have been more aggressive down there as well. And, you got a young quarterback in the red area, and hey, just don't put them in a bad spot until they're mature enough to handle those things. And so for the whole thing, it was a combination of a bunch of things. But the most important thing in the red area is go first down, second down, first down. When you get in these third and 8 on the 12, 3rd and 8 on the 23, like you're going to settle for field goals right there. And obviously Alex came in and bailed us out on some of these field goals, but all of a sudden you score in the red area, and the feel of the game's a little bit different as well.
Yeah, so kind of going off what D'Lo had to say there, I was looking at some of the numbers from what South Carolina did in the red zone, because they had, I think, 5 trips to the red zone. 2 of them obviously ended in touchdowns. But again, those came off of turnovers, and they were from inside the 10-yard line. So it took a few runs to punch the ball in and score those touchdowns off turnovers. But when you're starting a full drive, no turnovers, you're starting from your own 25 and you're going the opposite way. South Carolina got into the red zone 3 times. So that means they were inside the 20-yard line. And of those plays they had inside the 20, Lenoris only threw, to my knowledge, and from what I gathered, only 1 pass. He got sacked twice, and South Carolina ran the ball 8 times. So I think what we saw on Saturday was South Carolina not wanting to necessarily throw the ball a ton. I think they saw what happened earlier in the game with Lenoris and the receivers not really being in sync, and that was an issue. And because of that, you became a lot more one-dimensional. You had to rely a lot more on your Rocket Sanders of the world. You had to rely on Lenoir Sellers to run the ball. So I think that's where you saw the issues inside the red zone. But another thing is that they have to be able to throw the football. And to win games, look, we know this offense right now, they're going to be run first, run heavy, ground and pound type team. And we saw 56 carries on Saturday. It's not like going into Kentucky, they're going to run the ball 10 times. That'd be great. But, I think we're going to see a little bit more of an even balance, hopefully. But you're going to be a run-first team. And I think when you get your red zone opportunities, it's tough to just go from being so run-heavy to then slinging the ball whenever you want. And I think this weekend with Sellers, you got to see him have a little bit more poise in the pocket. I think when the play breaks down, his first instinct from what Dowell gathered was to run. And that's great and all if you're getting good chunks of yards. But against an SEC defense like Kentucky, I think that's going to be tough. So you got to be able to have a little bit more poise in the pocket, in my opinion. And that's something they definitely want heading into this weekend.
Jack, we're both 2000s kids. So as Hannah Montana says, you want the best of both worlds, right? You want to be able to run, you want to be able to throw. And I think for South Carolina, something that they need to improve on is just being a little bit more explosive when it comes to their offense. And that's something that we can certainly get into here. As you mentioned, a lot of running the ball. This past weekend, I think fans are craving it as well. Just more explosion, just a little bit more oomph in that offense. How can South Carolina find that, Jack?
Yeah, and it goes back to the point I made. It starts with Lenoris staying more in the pocket, and his offensive line also needs to give him more time. 4 sacks wasn't good enough. You got to be able to give him more time in the pocket, and you're facing a Kentucky defense that returns a lot of starters. But it's also not just all on Lenoris. It's also on his receivers, right? We go back to that game against Old Dominion. Jared Brown, gets he runs a go route down the field, and Lenoris throws a perfect ball. It's right in the hands, over the shoulder, and Jared Brown drops it. And I think it probably would have been a touchdown. But you also had a lot of disconnect between the receivers and quarterbacks. So you're definitely right about them wanting to be explosive. And Dowell Loggains was adamant about that today. Here's a little bit of what D'Lo had to say in his critique of the offense and why it's so important for them to be explosive.
I don't personally believe that time of possession is important for an offense. I think explosive plays and turnovers are really the 2 things that matter, and score touchdowns in the red area. I would say that if I was critiquing us as an offense, we weren't explosive enough in the passing game. We had 7 explosives total. 5 of those were in the running game and only 2 in the passing game. So for us to continue to get better, that's where our improvement is going to have to go from week 1 to week 2, week 2 to 3, is we have to be more explosive in the passing game, because that's how you score a point.
Now, it's easier said than done, right, for South Carolina to just flip a switch and bam, they're throwing the ball all over the place. Everything's working. Everything's clicking. They're more dynamic in that way. But like I said before, it really does start with Lenoris not just turning to his legs right out of the gate. Like, if he's about to take a sack, I mean, either throw the ball away if you can, or maybe make the run. But I mean, look, South Carolina, for me, what I think was missing on Saturday, and Old Dominion did a pretty good job of taking this away, was a lot of the short, dump off passes to whether it's your running back or someone running a slant. Old Dominion did a pretty good job of taking that away. So you hope that Kentucky doesn't replicate that. I think that's something they're going to notice in film, is like, hey, if we take away the short yardage game from South Carolina and we're able to slow down the run, Sellers is going to have to air it out. And then it's just a battle of, okay, what can Kentucky's DBs do against these receivers for South Carolina? But again, it's not just all on Sellers. It's on the receivers. They need to create more separation, for one. They got to catch the balls that are in their favor to catch. And they just got to make plays, man. I think that's just the main thing it comes down to, Kendall, is you got to make plays. And, you can't just be so reliant on the run, because at least to me, I just don't know if running the ball almost 60-plus times and doing that sort of thing is going to work again. That's just me, though.
Well, I think it's been talked about a lot this past week, not just for South Carolina, but I think the most growth that you would typically see in a team throughout a season is between week 1 and week 2. And that's something that Wes and I discussed yesterday on the recruiting rundown as well. You get your tapes back from week 1. You're finally able to see the way that your team performs in a game setting. You don't get preseason games, which is something that Shane Beamer has talked about for years now. When you are playing in college football, no preseason. So South Carolina now finally has a taste of what they are able to do. They kind of have a base to go off of, and I think that's helpful. But it is hard when your second game of the season is on the road against Kentucky. And we've talked about this game for so long, Jack, just saying how important it is for South Carolina, how much of a swing game it is. And we hate to use the term must win, but honestly, when you look at this schedule and you look at this season as a whole, if you want to go to a bowl game and you're South Carolina, you're looking at this Kentucky game and you're like, okay, this is kind of make or break here at this point. We're going to have to prove ourselves very early on in the season. So yes, you're looking for that growth from week 1 to week 2, but it's got to happen fast for South Carolina, and certainly a lot of adjustments that need to be made. But what I really appreciate about this coaching staff is they do take accountability. And that's something that Dowell Loggains said today. He said, if the players don't execute the way that you want them to, that is on the coaches, and it's about having better practice. So you hope for South Carolina a really good week of practice here. They were obviously able to see what Kentucky did last week and get a little bit of a better feel for what that team is about. But for this upcoming game against Kentucky, I think that's the main question. We've talked about it a little bit more accuracy, a little bit more explosion from the offense. But what is it, Jack, that you think this offense has to do specifically against a defense like Kentucky to be successful on Saturday?
It's a tough question to answer, just because, for one, Kentucky returns, I believe, I think Shane was talking about maybe like 10 starters on defense. I mean, that's insane. And obviously they got, big Deion Walker up front on the D line. He's going to be a tough guy to stop. If South Carolina can't stop him, in the trenches, I have a hard time believing they're going to be able to get much going in the run game. And I think that's where it starts for this team. Is we know they're going to run the football. So they have to be able to do it at a high level, more so than what they did last week. Here's my issue with last week, is that people want to look at 174 yards on the ground. That's great. That's wonderful. You did it on 56 carries, though, and you only averaged 3.5, not even 3.1 yards per carry. So it's not good enough from that aspect. You had some nice 15, 20-yard runs, but you didn't have the big 40, 50-yard explosive runs that you want to see in the run game that add that yards per carry up. But it also comes down to, and this is a point that I keep harping on here, is Lenoris, and he's got to be more poise in the pocket. He's got to stay in the pocket as long as he can until things do break down. Then it's like, okay, either find a guy to throw the ball to, whether it's a dump off pass or a longer ball that you find a receiver open, or just take off. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think it's a recipe for success to have a guy that is your future for the next 2-3 years at quarterback run the ball 20 plus times a game. You got to get that number down. I would say about, 10, 15 run attempts. That's just where I see it. But again, there's a lot of different things it comes down to. You got to be able to make plays. And South Carolina, they don't have a true number one receiver right now. They don't have that Xavier Leggett type guy. We've known about this for weeks. I mean, D'Lo talked about it last month where he was saying it's going to be by committee in that receiver room, and no one's been able to really separate themselves. Okay, that's true, but who is going to be able to be that guy that steps up this weekend at receiver? That's what I'm taking away from this. We saw some flashes. Vandrevius Jacobs had a nice little game, 2 catches for 59 yards, had a nice 41-yard catch. That was the longest play of the game in the passing game for South Carolina. But can we see more of that? I think is what it's going to take. And if that is the case, and more guys get involved, then I have a good chance of believing this team can win. But we're gonna have to see what happens. And William Jones makes a good point here. South Carolina does run a lot of RPOs, but if you get these short passes to build up his confidence, it's on the road. It's gonna be a tough environment to play in. If you're able to build up this guy's confidence with these short passes, get like 3-4 nice plays, nice passes in a row, then you can open up the run game a little bit, and then it will help. It will do so much for his confidence moving forward, I think.
Yeah, it's about keeping Kentucky on their toes. And if they know what to expect with South Carolina, run, that's not necessarily helping your case if you are the Gamecocks, I think, Jack. But, it should be interesting this weekend, and we've had an entire week of practice to go through. South Carolina has had an entire week of practice to go through here as they just try to work out some of those kinks that came up this past week. And it was the first question, actually, you were there in the post-game press conference that Shane Beamer held after the Old Dominion game. I believe the first question was how many of those run plays were designed for Lenoris versus how many just came spur of the moment because he felt like he had to. So it's a question that a lot of people are asking, and it's something that they'll certainly be keeping an eye on for this weekend. But as we kind of round out this conversation about the offense, one last thing I certainly want to touch on, and something that Dowell Loggains talked about today during his press conference. It's the offensive line. And he said that he thought they were better up front on the O-line for the first game compared to where they were at last year. He said he thinks they played hard with good effort. Jack, where do you think the offensive line this year on week 1 stacks up against what we saw last year in an O-line that certainly caused some question, I guess, amongst the fan base?
Yeah. I don't think it can get much worse than the protection you got up front last year for Spencer Rattler. I mean, you gave up 41 sacks on the offensive line last year. You gave up 9 in the opener against UNC. And granted, you cut that number down in half this past week, but I think a lot of people were very critical of this offensive line. And I know a lot of people are going to go out there and use the term piss poor, not good enough. Where's the improvement since last year? I think it's a little bit misleading. I think the offensive line had its moments. I mean, look, the way I look at it is I think South Carolina, what they were able to do in the run game goes back to what you were able to get up front on the offensive line. You don't run for that many yards. And granted, you had so many carries, but you don't run for that many yards with some explosive plays if you're not getting protection up front. I mean, look, South Carolina could leave the gate wide open and let these defenders come running home free, and it's on the running backs to try to make a play from there. But you got enough protection up front to where it's like, okay, Rocket Sanders, Juju McDowell, Lenore Sellers, they were able to find holes and run. So I think that's a positive that you can take away from the O-line. Is it where you want it to be yet? No, I don't think so. I don't think anything with this team is really where you want it to be at. And that's the way it should be for a week 1. But it just shows that, look, it wasn't the offensive line's best performance. There were times where they got beat off the ball. They just got to be better. And I think they're going to be. It's going to be tough this weekend against Kentucky, but I think it's a great test early in the season specifically for this line, because, I mean, if they limit the sacks, if the run game is as good as it was last week, and you're able to do more through the passing game, you get enough pass protection up front, I think good things can happen, and it'll be a real test and, chance to see how far along this offensive line has come. My thing is just, I believe in hard work and all that. If you work hard enough, I think things are going to work out. I think South Carolina's offensive line, from all we've heard and seen during the summer, they put in too much effort and work this summer to be better than last year. And I just think all that stuff they've been doing, it's too much not to be better. And I think they're definitely going to be moving forward. And, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think the big thing, though, with the O-line is just communication. We've heard them talk about it a lot here. But I think if you're able to communicate up front, everyone's on the same page, I think you're in a good position for this weekend.
Jack, you were there today when Dowell spoke. Last comments, anything that you would like to add before we move on from the offense and get into some defensive talk here on GC Live?
Yeah, I think we've really just covered about everything with this offense. Again, points that I keep reiterating here. They have to be able to – my 3 keys for the offense this weekend, if I had to pick some, obviously you got to block up front. That's the key. I think you did fine last week, but it could have been better. So limit the sacks. Let's keep the run game going. Try to get more stuff going through the air. That's my next key to the game, is just you got to be able to sling it, like Dowell said. I think all these words are empty right now until they go out there and put them into action. I'd love to see this offense be explosive, but it's going to come down to Lenoris not, running for dear life every time the play breaks down. If he's able to stay in the pocket, I think more times than not you could see some good things happen. And then, just like Dowell said, they got to finish in the red zone. If you want to win games this weekend and moving forward in the SEC, you can't be settling for field goals. Field goals do not win you games unless it's the last second you're in a tie game. You have to be able to turn these field goals from Alex Herrera into touchdowns. And look, South Carolina had a nice game on special teams kicking the ball over the weekend. They went 3 for 4 with Alex Herrera kicking. But what if you miss 2 or 3 of those field goals this weekend at Kentucky, neutral environment? That changes the game, doesn't it? So you want to just avoid that issue and just score as many points as you can, but let's have them come from touchdowns. That's kind of what I took away from today, is that all these things they're saying needs to be put into action.
7 points, given that you get the extra point, is a lot better than 3 points. Nothing against field goals. They have their time and place. But I think, that's pretty much a common and shared thought amongst everybody that is tuning in and watching the Gamecocks this season. Yes, you have to be able to execute when you are in the red zone. Will South Carolina be able to do it? Only time will tell. They're taking on Kentucky this weekend. And Jack, you are going to have all of the coverage from Kentucky, which I know you're so excited about. But before we get to the defensive side of things, what Clayton White had to say, we got another sponsor that helps to bring all of you GC Live on this lovely Wednesday.
Yeah, so we got a new sponsor that we're going to talk about here, and it is our new friends over at Prize Picks. This is something that I am personally very excited about, someone that has used Prize Picks before in the past. So if you don't know much about Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players' stat projections. And then, of course, you just watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 fantasy or daily fantasy sports app. You can pick. It's not just football or college football. You can bet or select. You got college football, NFL, MLB's going on right now. Literally anything that you can think of in the sports space. I've seen some crazy things like cricket and just any random sport you can think of. It's probably on Prize Picks, and that's why it is the top destination to go to. So if you're interested, you can go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app and use the code on screen GC, which stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups. It's a really good app. I can't recommend it enough just from personal experience. It's been my number one app to use in these situations over the years, and I cannot say enough good things about it. You get some struggles using these other apps and stuff for this sort of circumstance, but Prize Picks is the way to go. So we just want to welcome Prize Picks to the GC Live family, and looking forward to their this partnership for hopefully a while to come.
I want everyone watching to weigh in on this as well. We are going to talk about the defense here, and we heard from Clayton White a little bit earlier today. Jack, we'll start broad once again, and then we will narrow it down as we continue to talk. What is the biggest threat that Kentucky's offense poses for South Carolina's defense this weekend? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that Kentucky returns 11 or 10 starters up front on defense, and that's going to create issues. Look, in the past, we look at the game last year when South Carolina beat Kentucky. It took a good final minute drive from the Gamecocks to win that game. Obviously, Spencer Rattler making the really perfect pass to Xavier Leggett in the end zone, inside the red zone, to beat Kentucky and win that game. And that's what it's going to take on offense. But I mean, you look at this defense. I mean, the Wildcats can play, right? I mean, they had a few turnovers over the weekend in that weather-shortened Southern Miss game, and I think I've talked to some people on the Kentucky beat for a few days now. I mean, they've been saying this defense is going to be good this year, and it's going to be a strength for this team. So for South Carolina, how do you go about, defending or, playing good offense against these guys? I mean, it starts with taking Deion Walker, like I said, out of the game. But then Kentucky also has some pretty good DBs, linebackers. I mean, they really have the full package when it comes to their defense. And I mean, if adding on to the excitement for this game, I mean, these guys, they want to beat South Carolina. I mean, they've lost the last few times. And I think a big part of it does come down to that motivating factor, the extra juice that goes into, okay, look, we've lost to South Carolina the last few years. Let's go out there and beat these guys finally and shut down all the talking that's been going on from Shane Beamer and company. So, I mean, like William Jones says, this defense is as advertised. It's going to be tough. If you can get the run game going, that really will help you. But at the same time, South Carolina, to win this game, you got to be able to throw the ball. So it's going to be tough to see, but we'll have to see what happens.
Every time I think about Kentucky, I will never not think about the sunglasses.
Oh, I mean, how can you not?
Forever and always, that will be my memory associated with Kentucky. The last time that South Carolina played in Lexington, I was there myself, Michael Sauls, Colin Taylor, all made the trip up to Lexington, Kentucky, and it was great. I mean, just the amount of chirping that happened after that win for South Carolina, that's always what I'm going to associate Kentucky with. But a lot of people talking about Dylanstort in the comments. Let's just get right to it. Clayton White talked about him today as well. Very impressive in his debut with South Carolina on Saturday. He is going to be a game changer, not only for this game against Kentucky, but for the rest of the season. Just top tier talent with Dylanstort. What did Clayton White have to say about him today, Jack?
Yeah, so obviously Dylanstort, super exciting player to look at for Carolina. Obviously his first game as a Gamecock went, I think, probably better than anyone could have expected, Kendall. I mean, you look at the numbers. He had 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss, forced 2 fumbles, and in the final minutes of the game against ODU, he made the play that saved the game. Well, one of the 2 plays that did save the game for South Carolina, because you look at it, before Jalen Kilgore had the interception that did seal the game, Dylanstort forces a fumble on ODU's quarterback inside the ODU 10-yard line, and the Gamecocks recovering, and Lenora Sellers goes down and runs it into the end zone for what would be the game-winning score. But, I mean, he's a monster, and, I asked Clayton today, have there been any players that you have either coached or played against or played with, or whatever the case might be, that you feel are similar to what Dylanstort brings to the table? And when you look at it, I mean, there's not a ton of guys that are really comparable because, I mean, this guy's a freak athlete, God-given abilities. He said he's not really similar to like a bigger Bradley Chubb, who White coached at NC State, and Chubb is now in the NFL. Been in the NFL for a few years now. And Bradley Chubb is more like a Kyle Kennard, is what Clayton was saying. But the closest player that Dylanstort is resembled to is a name that probably not a lot of people have heard of, is D'Angelo Malone, who now plays with the Falcons. And I believe White coached him when they were at Western Carolina together. So not a big name, but still, I mean, Dylanstort is just one of those guys that doesn't have a lot of comparisons because there's not a lot of guys like him that can do what he does as a freshman at the college level, especially after his first game. I mean, the tape has been going around on Twitter about him just beating guys off the ball with his get off. It's quick, it's fast. There's just so much to like about him. And I think when you talk about him and Kennard on the edge, it's going to create so many problems for offensive lines, I think, moving forward. Because let's say you're Kentucky this weekend, and I know from talking to some guys, the Wildcats seem to have a little bit of an issue on the right side of the offensive line. If that's the case, you really have to pick your poison with who you want blocking these two guys. Because, I mean, one of them, I think, is going to be able to get through that offensive line, and we'll have to see what happens. But it really is pick your poison and hope for the best because, I mean, Dylanstort and Kyle Kennard, they bring a literal edge to the table, and it's something that I think a lot of offenses are going to have a tough time stopping, like I said.
Yeah, Kyle Kennard as well. Have to give him a ton of credit for what he did on Saturday with South Carolina. Such a bright spot in that game and something that South Carolina fans should be very excited about. We see a question from one of our viewers. Is it possible that this defense could be as good as some of those Spurrier defenses? Jack, what do you got?
Yeah, Big Red, great question. I'm not sure because those defenses were so prolific and so good all around during the Spurrier era. I'd say it's possible, but it's hard to beat like your Stephon Gilmore's, your DJ Swearinger's, your Jadeveon Clowney's of the world that were just a wrecking machine on defense. I think the one thing with if this defense could live up to that sort of hype, can South Carolina be better than what we're expecting this year? Can they be that 8, 9, 10 win team that, you know, it's hard to get to 11 wins like they did in the Spurrier era, but can South Carolina get to that win plateau, that record? I don't know. That's where I think I draw the line to how good this defense could be. But on its own, at face value, there's definitely the potential. But we still got a long way to go in the season. And again, we're judging all of what we've seen from this defense based off of what they did against Old Dominion. I think once you get into Kentucky and LSU, and the month of October is going to be really the big stretch where you're facing Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma. If you're able to replicate these kinds of performances against those teams, then I would buy the stock. But for right now, I'm going to be a little bit more cautious about it and just think, okay, let's wait and see what happens.
Well, Clayton White said it today. He said they want to put fires out as a defense, and you never know when the fire alarm is going to ring. So you have to go out there and get it. I'm glad they said that. I'm glad that they feel that way. But if you're South Carolina, you don't want it to be that way necessarily. Yeah. You don't want it to be that the defense has got to put this game on their back and go out there and make it happen and make sure that you stay in the game. And obviously that's going to happen with all different teams throughout the country. And, you know, you're going to have times where you're leaning really heavily on your offense or your defense to get you through in any type of game or specific situation. But you know, I appreciate that he said that, but in some ways it's like you don't necessarily want it to be that way all the time, because if it is that way, that means that your offense isn't necessarily putting you in a great position, Jack.
No, I definitely agree with you. You don't want the way Clayton referenced what Kendall was just talking about with putting out fires and stuff. I asked him about O'Donnell Fortune, who, if you missed the game, I believe ODU was definitely well inside the red zone, and they had a chance to score in the first half and really, you know, set the tone for what they did the rest of the game. And ODU's quarterback was looking to throw a ball to the outside near the pylon, and Nicky Minwari was covering him. did a great job of making the receiver cut. And then O'Donnell Fortune, who was just lurking off to the side, comes on in and picks off the pass because the quarterback did throw it low. And it was a great play. So that's kind of where it got referenced. But you're right, Kendall. You definitely don't want to be in these consistent situations where you're playing so-so on offense and then your defense is getting backed up and they got to go, make a stop in the red zone. Because, I mean, look, South Carolina did a great job against Old Dominion at making stops when it really mattered. But what if a more dynamic offense? What if Kentucky with Brock Vandegrift? What if that offense is able to go out there and turn those red zone mistakes into potential touchdowns? That's kind of where I'm interested to see what happens this weekend. There's so many different ways to look at this game, but that's definitely a big one is, okay, it's not just what the offense does in the red zone, but how does the defense prevent these offenses from scoring touchdowns and hold them to field goals? Because that's where I think you can really win these games.
And you can't be having your offense go 3 and out. Like, you got to give your defense a little bit of, and that's the thing last year that we dealt with a little bit was the defense maybe getting a little bit tired because they were on the field quite a bit. So you just got to make sure that, both sides of the ball are working as they should. I'm happy that the defense wants to put out fires and they want to be there and they want to be that group of guys that is able to secure a game and seal a game for you. If you're South Carolina, that's what you want. But you don't want it to always have to be that way. And certainly this past weekend, it did feel like the defense had to come up big in that moment for South Carolina. And they did. Shout out to OD. Great job. But again, that can't be a consistent thing, as you just mentioned, Jack. Getting a couple of good questions in the comments that we can certainly circle back to before we finish up. But before we're done talking about the defensive side of things, Jack, just one more thing that Clayton White discussed a little bit earlier today in his press conference, talked about wanting to get some more guys involved on this defense. What specific position groups was he talking about, and who could you see maybe having a little bit more of a chance to get some game time this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, I think he really wants to be able to, where they have the most depth, at least in his opinion, then even when you look at the roster, is easily the defensive line and linebacker. We saw them rotate so much on that D-line over the weekend. You saw, obviously, Kyle Kennard and Dylanstort getting there a ton. Let's keep in mind, Dylanstort didn't start. It was JT Gear out there starting at edge over the weekend. So there was a lot of rotation going on there. And then, obviously, on the interior, you had guys like DeAndre Jules, who picked up a fumble. You had Tonka Hemingway, who had a sack. Boogie Huntley, a lot of TJ Sanders. So many different guys rotated on that D-line. But I think you want more guys getting in there to keep them fresh. And that's going to be a big thing. And especially if your offense really isn't able to do much this weekend and your defense is on the field a lot, you're going to want to get different guys in there as much as you can. They've talked a lot about having hockey shifts on defense and stuff. And I feel like so far in that first game, they did a good job of getting guys in there. Let's just see it maybe a little bit more consistently. But if guys are playing super well like Dylanstort and Kyle Kennard did, obviously keep them in there longer if you need. But with linebacker, that is another spot where they do have a lot of depth. Obviously, Debo Williams, Bam Martin Scott, Demetrius Knight are your main three at linebacker. But we saw another guy like Ronnie Porter getting there at linebacker. You have a lot of different options with what you want to do on the front end of this defense. But it is definitely going to be important to rotate and get guys in there. But it's tough. But here's a good point that Leonard Moore makes that I was actually just about to bring up. It's going to be hard to rotate when teams are going tempo, and we saw that this weekend with ODU because they run a Tennessee-style offense where it's a little bit more up-tempo, and it's not as easy as when you're facing a more slowed down, cool offense that isn't really moving the ball as quickly. It's tougher to get these guys in when this offense is going at a quicker pace. So we'll have to see what Kentucky does to kind of counteract that. But I definitely do think South Carolina's defense, you got to limit some of the mistakes too. And that's another thing that we can talk about real quick is just there were two main issues that South Carolina had during this game against ODU. Number one, DQ Smith got beat on a 72-yard touchdown pass for ODU, and that was a main issue that Clayton talked a little bit about. And here's an interesting clip from what Clayton had to say about that, because I know that's something a lot of people have brought up in the comments, and a lot of people are critical of DQ Smith for the way he played. Here's kind of what Clayton White had to say, because it's an interesting perspective, Kendall, that it's important to not bash your defenders for the way they played. Like, mistakes are going to happen. You just got to be confident in them, because DQ Smith, he's a 3-year starter at this point. He's shown a lot over the years. So here's what Clayton had to say.
To me, DQ had a bad couple plays. We always try to make sure we talk about bad plays. Just like saying, you have a bad morning, it don't mean you're going to have a bad day in life. So he had a bad couple plays. That's not how we talk. 2 plays don't make it a bad game. So he played well on the other plays. So his process of readiness for that game was on point. But we also try to speak in different terms. But we definitely want to keep his confidence up, want to keep him going. He's one of our best football players by far. He'll be ready to go this week.
And you have to admire the way Clayton just has that respect for him, because obviously it's not like last year where you're starting, let's say Jalen Kilgore made that type of play, and this is his first game starting, and he makes that play and gets beat on the ball. I mean, this is a different situation where you got DQ Smith now in his 3rd year starting. He made one bad play. Okay, move on and get ready for the next play. It's not like it's just a coincidence that he's been starting for this long. He's going to be fine. I know a lot of people are critical of him, but I think he's going to be okay. And then you just got to hope the rest of the secondary continues to make those big plays that they were. Again, I referenced it earlier. Jalen Kilgore had that big interception. Odie Fortune, another big play there. Nick Emanwari made some nice plays in space. You just hope overall with this defense, I know it's a long answer to a simple question, but it's you need all 11 guys to be able to play well in order to win this football game on Saturday on defense.
And back to the point of rotating guys, how much do you worry, Jack, that if you are rotating guys, like Clayton said he wants to do a little bit more of, and you've got all this depth, how much are you worried that that could affect some of the chemistry on defense as a whole? Are you more worried about that than making sure that these guys are getting their chance to play?
That's a good question. I think with the amount they rotate, I think they've thrown so many different combinations together on the field to where it's like chemistry really isn't that big of an issue, because these guys are all playing with each other one way or another. It's like, I mean, if let's say you have a front 4 of Dylanstort, Kyle Kennard, Tonka, and Boogie, and then you have your 2 to 3 linebackers of Bam, Debo, and Demetrius Knight. No matter how you spin it, no matter how you get those guys in there, they're all going to be playing with each other one way or another during the game. So it's like I don't really worry as much about the chemistry. I just more so worry about, okay, if a guy's tired and he's getting worn down, because look, it's still the heat of the summer, technically, I guess. It was hot in Columbia. I don't know what the temp's going to be in Lexington, but I'm sure it's going to be warm for a 3:30 kick. You have to worry about, okay, if your guys are getting sluggish and tired, let's get some new guys in there. And that might be tough with an up-tempo offense, but if Kentucky's a little slower, if they're, a little more precise with, getting the right play calls in and stuff and not just hurry, I think South Carolina can get who they want in there and get the right matchups. So we'll have to see. But I definitely do think I wouldn't be too worried about chemistry just because they played so well on Saturday. If they didn't play as well on Saturday, I think it'd be a different story, different answer to this question. But no, I mean, chemistry, I'm not too worried about because, again, it's a different look almost every drive. I mean, you got so many different guys mixing and matching and coming in there.
All right, Jack, we've talked quite a bit about the defense. Final thoughts from you. What are they before we move on?
Yeah. I mean, like we said, I think the 2 mistakes they made, again, the 72-yard touchdown that DQ got burnt on, you can't have that. It's not the end of the world. But again, a guy that is now in his 3rd year, you can argue he shouldn't be making those types of mistakes, but it's going to happen. Good receivers are just going to make good plays sometimes. The other touchdown mistake they did make that Clayton did reference was the 36-yard run by the quarterback for ODU on the touchdown late in the game. That was just a simple mistake that South Carolina made, and you don't want to have that again. With Brock Vandergriff, I've learned he's a guy that can run if needed, and sometimes he'll take his chances, but for the most part, he's your pocket passer type player. So I think the big matchup this weekend is going to be with those receivers against those DBs and seeing what South Carolina can do in the secondary. I think they're going to be tested a lot out there in space. But if South Carolina can hold their own out there, I give them a good chance because, again, Kentucky's down their top running back. So it's a lot more of by committee and seeing what the Wildcats have in the run game. So I think just win the battle on the outside, and I give South Carolina a good chance, especially with those guys coming off the edge.
We're going to get into all of our predictions, what we think for this weekend as we get a little bit later into the week. Shout out to Morgan for the weather forecast on Saturday in Lexington. 72 as the high. I mean, that's pretty good.
That's nice.
I'm going to be in Chicago this weekend, and I'm hearing that it's supposed to get into the 50s at night. So
man.
I'm like, not ready for that, but 72 degrees as the high. Not bad. I remember when we were there a few years ago, it wasn't too bad.
It was a night game, though, too. You got to remember that. And I think it was when y'all went to Lexington. I believe it was in October. It was mid-season.
It was October, yeah.
So, yeah, but for a 3:30 kick, 72 degrees, I mean, I haven't even packed yet.
September.
Yeah, I'm going to be packing a little differently, I guess, then. It's going to be –
Thanks to Morgan. Would you have looked at the forecast if it wasn't for Morgan?
No, I mean, I eventually would have. I mean, I'm not that lazy. I'll look at the forecast. I mean, I got to be able to pack somehow. But yeah, I mean, it'll be a nice change of pace from 90-something degrees. It was hot on Saturday, Kendall, in Columbia. It was awful.
Hot on a Saturday in Columbia?
In August, too. In August.
Wow, I'm truly shocked. You knocked me over with a feather at this point. I'm shocked. No, it is a hot place, but we're used to it at this point. Team has practiced all summer long. Obviously different when you get into a game situation and it's go, 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 go. But South Carolina, all that matters is they came away with the win against Old Dominion on Saturday. They now head into this week 2 matchup against Kentucky on the road in Lexington, their first road matchup of the season. How will they do? Obviously, they want to do well because you have to get that momentum started if you are going to compete against LSU the following weekend back at home in Columbia at Williams-Brice Stadium. A huge recruiting weekend. And speaking of recruiting, to add a little shameless plug in here, Wes Mitchell and I are back with our recruiting rundown shows each and every week. We just did one. It came out yesterday. We talked about some of the guys that came out to the game on Saturday, what their reactions were, and kind of where South Carolina stands right now on the recruiting trail. So certainly check that out. There's going to be a big weekend coming up against LSU. But before that, it's South Carolina and Kentucky. I think that rounds us out for the show, Jack. I think we kind of hit on everything we wanted to hit today with Dowell and Clayton talking, and there will be more GC Live throughout the week, so obviously a lot more to get to as well.
Yeah, I think we hit on just about everything. Again, the main thing I take away from today is just there's a lot of good recognizing what was good and what was bad from the game. Obviously, from an offensive perspective, run game was pretty good, I think, overall compared to last year. Anything's better than last year at this point. You got to be better passing the ball, though. Lenoris has to be more of that guy in addition to what he does with his legs. But then from a defense perspective, you got to alleviate the mistakes, and you got to be able to continue to create turnovers because normally when South Carolina wins games, it comes down to winning the turnover battle and then when they rush for more than 100 yards. So if you're able to do those things combined with everything else we've talked about today, it's easier said than done, but I think they have the ability to go out there and beat Kentucky. I know last time I checked, the spread was like Kentucky -10. I know it's not the end-all, be-all, but I think South Carolina can go out here and surprise a few people and make a big turnaround compared to what they did over the weekend against Old Dominion.
Well, Jack is going to have you all covered in Lexington, Kentucky. Jack, safe travels. Have a fun trip to Lexington. It's a fun place to be. Enjoy the game. And thank you, everybody, so much for watching. It's so good to be back. I think this was Jack and I's first ever.
Oh, yeah. First ever show together.
Hey, Josh, what's up? How are you? Thank you guys for welcoming me back so kindly. It's so nice to be able to be involved even from afar. I am staring at the Charlotte skyline right now, but I am so happy to be involved and still get to hang out with you guys a couple times a week here on Gamecock Central. So keep up with everything that is going on the website, GamecockCentral.com. Follow us on social media at Gamecock Central. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday edition of GC Live. For Jack Veltri, I'm Kendall Smith. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you soon.